to everybody in the process. The shippers, perhaps the trucking, the truck builders, if there's something involved there too, and it looks like it might be a products case with it, immediately send anti-spoliation, and if they violate those, then that's always a good day in court for us. Sure.
It seems like the heart of the question though isn't should we allow clergy to spoil evidence. It's more of a question of if I give a godly admonition, don't spoil evidence, and then the priest does,
okay.
And then I say, I don't care about the misconduct thing that we were going to try you for. I can now get rid of you because you spoiled evidence when I told you not to. That's where it feels like a big hammer to me as well. I mean, I know that is a consequence of godly admonition.
I would put it this way. Here's what I'm wrestling with. Not that you stop from spoliation of evidence, but I don't think that's a tool of godly admonition as it's written in here. And I think that's going way beyond. That's already saying we're in investigation and you are accused. And so if that's true, I don't think that's at the level of godly admonition. I think that's another level. And because we're talking about this tool that's at the beginning stages and the possibility of recognition. And I assure you, when you get that godly admonition, you are now in the middle of a complete rift between your rector and your bishop. You're in a fight. And if that's the tool that you use for it, I think what we've been talking about with godly admonition is a tool that may be able to reconcile. But once you've done that, you've blown any chance of reconciliation. So that's my concern when you say that.
Rich, one response there, and also for you, Bishop, is that assume, and I know there is one, a diocese that to whom behavior is an integral part of faith for all employees of the diocese and all members of the diocese, all. Therefore, in one section it says, employees of the diocese shall follow biblical, moral, and ethical standards. In another place it says all employees. One place all members, another place all employees. And you've got a situation that's arising out of someone claiming that they're being sent harassing pornographic material. I just would not see any limitation in the propriety of a godly admonition that says do not destroy any electronic media at all. Again, it's just one lawyer's thought.
If I can just add one thought, the example that I used of that, the outcome of the godly admonition, which was not limited to that point, was confession and repentance by the clergy member for ungodly conduct and provision of pastoral care and counseling and spiritual support for that clergy member for their marriage with the goal of having them equipped to continue in ministry. So I think you're raising very legitimate concerns, but I would disagree, and I disagree for empirical reasons, that necessarily says that the relationship between the bishop and the clergy person is now one of adversary.
That's interesting.
If you do it well, and if you do it with a pastoral heart, what you're saying is, I want to think the best. I do have some duties of oversight, and what I'm asking you to do is be transparent and forthcoming with me, because that is godly humility and repentance. And in response, I can then have godly accountability and oversight for you aimed at helping you deal with the struggle. So that goes to that point about with great power comes great responsibility. I want to flag that there are ways you can use it that you may not think of. Your questions that you're asking should always be a part of how are we planning to use it? What am I saying to the bishop? And to go to perhaps your fundamental point, my understanding as chancellors, which is a legal role but not solely a legal role, we are officers of the church. Our duty first and foremost goes to the church. And so as we render our advice to a bishop or to a standing committee or in another setting, we may at some point say our duties to God are paramount. And if that means that I have to resign my position with a letter to the bishop over what the concern is, resign the position and then speak out, consistent with my ethical constraints and my duties, all of those may be options. But the hope is that we are serving the Church of God and not just those that he's entrusted with special responsibility to lead that church. And the good news, in my experience, I have never had a bishop that I've been serving ask me to do something that was contrary to the good of the Church of God as best I could understand it. And I've often had them say, should I do this? You know, what's the wise path? What's faithfulness? But the response has always been wonderful. I mean, I think that's, as you recounted your story, I was thinking, Mose, what a godly bishop and what a great experience that you're giving advice to someone whose heart is set on, I really want to serve the Lord in a very difficult circumstance.
So you see the chancellor as,
I realize we should let.
no, I'm sorry. You see the chancellor basically as a prosecutor for the purpose of these proceedings, Title IV proceedings.
We should probably run down the panel and give each of our observations.
I still didn't hear the question. You see the chancellor as what?
As a prosecutor,
Oh, I see.
I would not want to be the prosecutor necessarily. And others may feel that it would be appropriate in that role. But you know, we always look to increase service within the church, and if there's other attorneys out there that are used to going to court and are capable of handling this, and have also had some experience, then have someone else as your actual trial prosecutor. Just want to point back on what Phil mentioned. This is a very important canon that he brought up. That's Canon 2, number 8, 1 and 4 both. Number 1, exemplary behavior is required of all clergy and all laity to be appointed or to remain in office. So when we get into a lot of these computer things now, it's very often it goes to those type of things. So it's not just listed in the disciplinary canons where the basis are for bringing charges, but it's these other places. And Phil was talking about you know, canonical oaths, etc.
Well, yeah, I mean, clearly, maybe just to go back to this point about the question about the role of the chancellor. I mean, my understanding of it is that we are the senior ecclesiastical advisors of the bishop, and as Scott said, to the church. So when I initially, unfortunately, I've had very few of these, but initially being involved, if I think in terms of my client, if I was to think that way, it would be the bishop, but him in the capacities representing the diocesan entity, which is the Church of Christ. So that would be the priority. So I think it would be, if you ever get beyond preliminary investigation, pre-presentment stuff, once you're into that, I would think it would be almost inappropriate for the chancellor to be involved in the prosecution at that point. I mean, I think you pull away. You've been giving advice at that point to one of the parties, right? In this case, the bishop. So I would probably say no to that. The thing I just wanted to mention is that I think sometimes, and listening to your story, it was incredible, but I think sometimes we have a danger, we put our lawyers' hats on first. I know this is going to sound unpopular, but I think sometimes initially when I get some of these, is try not to think adversarial, not to actually think like a lawyer. My primary job here is to go to the church, all right, and to assist the bishop. And as much as possible, hopefully, prayerfully, it doesn't become adversarial, right? So for instance, you were concerned about an admonition to hand over all, not to hand over all your computer records or keep them. I mean, I would think that hopefully we don't get into adversarial. In other words, the initial, there's a problem, there's a complaint, the bishop starts dealing with his clergy, and the pastoral kicks in right away. And this ends up being handled pastorally. I'm not trying to sound Pollyannish about it. It could very quickly get beyond that. But as much as possible, we should see, if we can, to keep it at that level.
Yeah, I think Mike has well articulated my perspective. My operating assumption is, as Chancellor, I'm never going to be the prosecutor. I don't know that it's a categorical prohibition, but I think it's a default assumption that at that point I've already advised one of the parties.
Right.
Well, as you could tell from what I said, I was anticipating representing the bishop at the proceeding. And our canons say he will be represented by the chancellor or another lawyer that he can delegate. There was some discussion about, he's actually thought that he should bring in somebody who had experience as a criminal prosecutor to handle that, and there was some discussion about that. So all these points are great, and I'm not disputing at all. I'm just saying in this particular case, it was headed that I was going to be the one standing in the trial court.
Canonically,
that's
appropriate.
Well, it's not unusual for the attorney to advise his client who's a party in the case. I mean, that happens all the time.
Right.
Bose, it sounds like that might be a good time to make the decision to utilize multiple personnel.
I just
Let
have
me give you this.
I just have a few procedural questions. I think we've had 3 disciplinary situations since I became chancellor. And we've got one that Jeff and I have talked about that isn't disciplinary yet. And even early on in these other ones, we didn't have written accusations. And I'm wondering, do you